Minasan yokoso. Welcome to Nichibei Global Talks. Today we have an episode to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. We're bringing together two special conversations for you. The first conversation is with the current mayor of Hiroshima City, Mayor Kazumi Matsui. He has served as mayor since April of 2011 and he's been re-elected twice. We had a chance to discuss this year's Peace Memorial Ceremony on August 6th and his message to the international community. For the second conversation, we had a chance to catch up with Professor Jennifer Lent, Associate Professor in the Department of Government at Dartmouth College. She's written a lot on historical memory and international reconciliation along with international relations. We discussed the progress the United States and Japan have made on reconciliation over World War II and the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Mayor Matsui, thank you for joining us. Can you please tell us what the background and significance of the Peace Declaration is?
平和宣言はですね、実は被爆から2年後のですね、1947年8月の6日に開催されました、第1回のですね、平和祭という場におきましてね、当時の市長さん、浜井市長さんによってですね、初めて読み上げられたんですね。そしてその浜井市長さんのですね、説明を少しご紹介いたしますとね、そもそも平和祭というのは、どちらを向いても戦災の焼け跡だらけとなった広島市のこの地でですね、食べるものも着るものも乏しくて、いわば、虚脱状態になっていた多くの被爆者を含む市民の間にですね、覚醒しておりました精神というか魂。例えばですね、もう何としても戦争は真っ平だと。こんな残酷なことが人間の世界に許されていいんだろうかと。で、これは我々広島市民だけの問題ではなくて、このような悲惨事がですね、二度とこの地球上に起こらないように、我々の体験を全世界の人々に訴えて、真の平和の確立に努めなければならないと。それが広島市に生き残ったですね、私たちの責務であると。こんな重い精神、魂がですね、実は共鳴し合ってですね、始められたもんだというふうに言われております。そしてその平和祭の中の中心行事の一つである平和式典。ここで、広島市民の意識をですね、全世界に宣揚するために平和宣言を行われたと。こういうふうに説明されております。被爆から75年が経過いたしまして、自分らの自らの被爆体験を語って、そして核兵器の非人道性とか、平和の尊さを訴える被爆者という方々が年々少なくなっております。そうすると、原子力をもって争う世界戦争というものがですね、人類の破滅と文明の終末を意味するというこの真実をですね、世界の人々に明白にですね、認識していただくということは非常に難しくなる。そんな中で、その被爆の体験というものを世界の人々に広めて、さらに次の世代ですね、に伝える。そして平和の思いを市民社会全体のですね、いわば共通の価値観にするということの重要性がですね、ますます高まっていると思っています。平和宣言はそのためにですね、やり続けるというものと思っています。
Given Corona and everything else going on this year, how did the Peace Memorial Ceremony go? And is there anything particular, Mayor Matsui, that you would like to emphasize to the international community in this year's Peace Declaration, as it is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II?
はい。今年の平和宣言ではですね、この時代背景として2つの人類に対する脅威ということを取り上げました。ご存知のように1つはですね、新型コロナウイルスの感染症拡大。これが一つでありますし、もう一つはですね、為政者、とりわけですね、核兵器を持っている大国の為政者におけるですね、自国第一主義を信奉すると、これが台頭するというこの問題であります。この二つがですね、いわば脅威というふうに受け止めました。どちらともですね、直ちに解決するということは困難な問題ではありますけれども、これにですね、負けないようにしていくということが重要でありまして、そのためにはですね、市民社会がですね、多くの国民市民がですね、共通の理念のもとで連帯して、そして継続して立ち向かっていくということが必要であるというふうに強く訴えたつもりであります。 その上で核兵器の廃絶と世界公共平和の実現に向けて、国際社会全体が歩みを進めるためにですね、これまで以上にですね、先ほど申し上げた平和宣言の内容をですね、広く世界に発信するということ、平和を願う広島の心、多くの人たちにですね、共有していただくためにですね、いろんな工夫をしたというのが今回の平和式典でありました。例えば、国連のグテーレス事務総長からビデオメッセージをいただいたんですけれども、それを式典会場で放映するということをいたしましたし、新型コロナ感染防止のために参列できない海外の来賓の方から寄せられたビデオメッセージ。それは核兵器廃絶とか世界公共平和に関するビデオメッセージですけども、そういったものとか、被爆者の体験、思いが込められたビデオメッセージ。こういったものも同様にですね、その会場で放映するといった新たな試みもやってみました。そういったことでですね、非常に式典そのものは規模は縮小せざるを得ませんでしたけども、発信力をですね、高めるという工夫をしたのが今回の平和記念式典だというふうに思っております。
What is the role of the bombed areas in this 75th year anniversary at the end of World War II, and what are the priority issues for them going forward?
はい。被爆から75年を迎えてですね、核兵器禁止条約、これが発行するということが視野に入ってきている。そんな状況の中でですね、この被爆地の役割といたしましては、何といっても被爆者の願いであります。一日も早い核兵器のない世界の実現、これに向けてですね、着実に歩を進めていくことになる、この核兵器禁止条約そのものにですね、いわば魂をですね、入れていくことだというふうに思っております。魂を入れるということは、この条約のですね、実効性を高めていくということが次の大きな課題というふうに思っています。
Finally, what is your message to the people around the world, including Americans, on this 75th anniversary?
1945年8月の広島、長崎両市への原子爆弾の投下というのはですね、第二次世界大戦を終わらせるためにやったんだというふうな説明がなされることがありますけれどもですね、原子爆弾の投下によって一瞬にして廃墟と化して、その年の12月末までにですね、両市民合わせて21万人超える多くの尊い命が奪われたこと、そしてかろうじて生き残った被爆者、これはですね、75年が経過しようとする現在でもですね、放射線による高障害などで苦しみながらですね、そしてその中でも市民と共にこんな思いを誰にもさせてはならないと訴え続けているという事実があることを、世界中の皆さんですね、まずこれをどのように受け止められるでしょうか。そして現在ですね、世界の核保有国が保有しております核兵器ですね、まだ1万3000発以上あります。当時のですね、1000倍以上の破壊力を持っておりましてね、その核兵器が意図せずとも事故あるいはテロなどで使用される可能性があるといったこと、そして核保有国やその同盟国はですね、自分たちの国民の安全を保障するためだと言って、核抑止力が欠かせないと、どうも考えているようでありますけれども、一度使用してしまうとですね、その使用した自らのですね、存在そのものを危うくするばかりか、人類存亡のですね、危機にさらされることになりかねないということが明白になっていること、これをですね、世界中の皆さん、どういうふうに受け止めているでしょうか。世界はですね、今年、国境とか人種を問わずコロナウイルス化に見舞われておりますけれども、連帯して共同して取り組んでいくということがですね、その脅威に対応することになるということを肌身に感じて、ね、いわゆる実体験しております。この実体験を踏まえるならばですね、人類共通の脅威ともいえるこの核兵器、そしてそれをはじめとした国際的な安全保障に関わる諸課題に対しましてですね、それを解決するためにはですね、世界中の皆さんが今申し上げたような事実をしっかりと認識し、その上で被爆者の思いを受け止めていただいて、 強固でグローバルなですね、協調関係、これを築いていかなければなりません。よろしくお願いいたします。
Thank you so much, Mayor Matsui, for sharing your message to the international community on this occasion of the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. Jennifer, thank you for joining Nichibei Global Talks. We just had a fascinating conversation with the mayor of the city of Hiroshima about the message he delivered at this year's unique peace memorial ceremony thanks to COVID-19. As we reflect on what happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki 75 years ago, we also wanted to reflect on how these two countries, Japan and the United States, have overcome this past from being enemies to becoming such strong allies today. So my first question is, how much progress has there been on reconciliation between the U.S. and Japan over our wartime past, particularly in relation to Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, I think we've seen dramatic progress. We've seen a dramatic reconciliation between the U.S. and Japan over the years. Of course, during and right after the war, we saw each other as enemies. We've just gone through this horrendous experience. But then we chose in the early days of the Cold War to ally with each other because we had sound strategic reasons to do that. The alliance at that time, however, was quite narrow, and I would describe it as an alliance between two governments, even just the LDP and Washington. And you saw this in the early 1960s with the security treaty crisis, where the people had deep skepticism about alignment with the United States, the people of Japan. And I think the governments realized this, both governments. And so they said, hey, we can't just have this nice little alliance between our governments. We have to actually bring our people on board. And so they made efforts to broaden and deepen our cooperation. And we can see that this succeeded stupendously. Today, our two countries are not only each other's key security ally, but also warm friends with genuine sense of friendship toward one another and shared values and shared interests. Now, you mentioned Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I think that's one area that in the process of this reconciliation, we glossed over a lot of each other's wartime wounds in service of that alliance, in service of bilateral relations. And so Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I think, are part of that. I think there are still big differences in the way that both countries view those events, but it hasn't stood in our way. And actually, under President Obama and Prime Minister Abe, we did see efforts, really impressive, quite moving efforts, to demonstrate respect for one another's suffering and to acknowledge that suffering.
So what are the key factors that led to this progress you just spoke about? And what lessons can we draw from the U.S. and Japan experience of reconciliation?
Well, I think what brought the U.S. and Japan together is what always brings countries together, former enemies at least, in international politics, which is a shared security threat. And as we know, it's a really big thing to ask of people to cooperate with those who just wounded them so deeply. And especially after years of fanning animosity through propaganda and so on. So it's, leaders in such a situation need a really compelling reason to ask their people to do this, to sort of look forward rather than back, and to trust the other side enough to partner with them. And so that compelling reason is generally a security threat. And so this was certainly the impetus for the US-Japan alliance. We were both fearful of the Soviet Union and the spread of communism. And so governments in the early years after the war saw a shared interest in the alliance. And we saw the same thing in Europe, where France and Britain and other countries decided they could trust West Germany in NATO to have a security alliance with NATO. To have a security alliance with West Germany, despite the fact that they had just endured such terrible brutality at German hands. So again, they were all worried about a dangerous security threat from the Soviet Union. So the big lesson for historical reconciliation, I think, from these World War II experiences, the US and Japan included, is it takes something pretty dire to bring about historical reconciliation.
Well, we discussed with the mayor of Hiroshima City about this year's peace declaration. He expressed his hope for the future generation and the international community to say never again to nuclear weapons. Given the current geostrategic environment, that makes this difficult. What do you think is the historical significance of Hiroshima's experience in world history?
I think the historical significance of Hiroshima is really fascinating as we're looking in an era where, it's quite contrary and regrettably to what the many activists in Hiroshima had hoped. We do see that nuclear weapons are enduring in international politics and that more and more countries seem to be interested in acquiring them. So the hope of the spirit of the activists in Hiroshima, I think it's going to be a long term in being realized, if ever. But it's certainly not a moment for defeatism. If nuclear weapons are becoming even more common in international politics, then I think it's just even more important that we have active civil societies like the many groups that work so hard in Hiroshima, like the mayor and the other governing authorities in the city and Japanese leaders more broadly. It's really important that we have communities like that who are reminding us about the dangers of nuclear weapons, who are keeping their eye on governments as they're maybe choosing to get nuclear weapons or managing, in the US case and other cases, managing nuclear arsenals. So these kinds of activities, these kinds of civic groups are deeply, deeply important, even in a world in which nuclear weapons persist.
What are future steps that the United States and Japan can take for future generations of Americans and Japanese to come to terms with what happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Well, the meeting with President Obama and Shinzo Abe in Hiroshima was such a breakthrough because, again, it was the first time that we decided, among our national leaders at least, to initiate this kind of high-level conversation about some of the wartime atrocities. It was really important in terms of leadership to see our national leaders join this conversation and to make even further progress in acknowledging and again showing respect for the suffering that Japan endured in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And with Shinzo Abe's visit to Pearl Harbor, showing respect for the Americans who suffered and died there. So we've seen amazing progress since the initial strategy of, we got to cooperate with each other and let's sort of brush this stuff under the rug and in order to have stable relations, and we'll deal with it later. Well, we're dealing with it. And I think that because we have such high levels of trust amongst each other, that puts us in a really good position to make further progress. We're in a great position to make that progress. We have thriving free societies with really high quality educational institutions, media, organizations such as Japan Society, many other organizations. And so those, I would argue, are really where the great important work of historical reconciliation can make tremendous progress.
いかがでしたか? We hope you enjoyed this Nichibei Global Talks. From today, my takeaways are this. Our conversation with Mayor Matsui helped us appreciate the Peace Declaration as a powerful reminder of the destruction and suffering caused by the dropping of atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From our conversation with Jennifer, it helped us appreciate how much progress the United States and Japan have made in reconciliation over their wartime past. Jennifer also reminded us that there is a strategic imperative that was a big driving factor with U.S.-Japan reconciliation. But the United States and Japan also made great efforts to broaden and deepen trust and cooperation beyond the alliance to include our people and societies. Over time, as a result, the two countries were able to make further progress in addressing wartime wounds, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What emerged out of both of these conversations was the importance of education, free and vibrant civil societies. These are crucial foundations that the United States and Japan share, and this is what has helped us not repeat the same mistakes of the past, but also not to be stuck in the past. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please subscribe to our social media channels and follow us wherever you can to stay connected. Thank you again and see you soon. またお会いしましょう。僕の友達みんな広島のお好み焼きが一番大好きですから、そこに来ました。やっぱり焼きそばとお好み焼きのミックスが大好き。
私お好み焼き作るの上手なんですよ。
そうですか、それが有名なんですか。
ご披露しますよ。
わかりました。僕はお好み焼きすごい下手なんですね。僕は札幌ラーメンはいいんですよ。他はダメですね。
ひっくり返すの上手がペッとこうね、ひっくり返す。
はいはい。